Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, The Connected Vehicle, brought to you by GPS World and Platinum sponsor, Hemisphere. I'm Bethany Chambers from North Coast Media, publisher of GPS World Magazine, and I will be your event manager. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. The recording will be available 2 weeks from today on our website, gpsworld.com/webinars. A link to the on-demand recording will also be emailed to you when it is available. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways in which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice in the lower left-hand corner of your console that there is a Submit button. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Just type in the text box at the bottom left, then click Submit, place your question in queue. Questions that were submitted during registration may be covered in this webinar. Some questions may also be answered in an upcoming issue of GPS World Magazine or in one of our e-newsletters. We strive to answer as many of your questions as possible. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, select Help to submit your issue, and Assistant Producer Diane Safranik or I will personally assist you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our moderator, Wireless LBS Insider Editor, Janice Partyka.
Thank you, Bethany. Welcome to the Connected Vehicle webinar. I'm Janice Partyka, and I am the contributing editor of Wireless for GPS World. I'm also an editor of Wireless LBS, a GPS World monthly newsletter, and for many years I was the editor of Wireless Pulse, another GPS World publication. I write about mobile location-enhanced applications, services, technologies, and business, including the connected vehicle. You can sign up for a free subscription to the Wireless LBS newsletter at www.gpsworld.com/subscribe. I am also a strategic marketing consultant for businesses in the mobile and location industries. I work with companies that offer technology, infrastructure, or apps and services, and help clients define markets, develop new offerings, position companies and products, and create marketing communications. The webinar will start with our panelists briefly introducing themselves, and they will explain where they fit in the market. I will then quickly define what we mean by connected vehicle. We will then have our panel discussion. During that, I will poll you on your opinion on some important issues concerning the connected vehicle, and I'll share those results. And last, we will have a question and answer period based on the questions that you submit during the publication. Our panelists represent different parts of the connected vehicle ecosystem. I'm going to start by introducing David Jumpa. David's from Airbiquity, maker of cloud-based platforms for the connected vehicle. David.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon in the East Coast or where in the world you're calling in for this event. My name is David Jumpa. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer with Airbiquity. I manage all global sales, business development, program management, as well as marketing. Let me tell you a little bit about the company. We have now been in business since 1998, one of the pioneers in the connected vehicle or telematics industry. Airbiquity is a Seattle-based technology company. We are a trusted supplier in this market space. We've been providing services for the automobile manufacturers for connected car, not only in North America, but now on a global scale. We provide a cloud-based service that we call Choreo to address several key applications as the market continues to grow. Areas that we have expertise in are safety and security, smartphone integration with the Ford Sync, Nissan Connect program, electric vehicles. We power the services for Ford electric vehicles as well for Nissan Leaf. Fuel and emissions, we're doing a lot of applications and services in this marketplace. We do mobile resource management as part of our Shell program and the new and up-and-coming services insurance-based programs. If you look at the center of what we call Choreo or a cloud-based service, you will see that we not only are enabling the actual services that I've discussed above in the previous slide, but we're also now partnering with several new vendors that are coming into the ecosystem. These are very large companies. Tier 1 suppliers that are trying to package services as they try to themselves recreate themselves in the connected vehicle and in the head unit space, like Continental, Panasonic, Alpine, Denso, that are trying to bring smartphone integration services to the vehicle, as well as call center service providers that are entering the market as part of that, and all these plethora of application providers. The newest entrants into this space are the wireless carriers as part of what they're trying to do to fix the different and various business models. I'll stop there, and I will turn it over to Scott McCormick.
I just want to say that Scott heads the Connected Vehicle Trade Association, and he personally and his association has greatly moved the connected vehicle industry forward. Scott.
Hi. I want to give you a little bit of a history about how we got to where we are, because this hasn't happened overnight. In 1999, all 12 automakers with about 30 major tier suppliers formed a nonprofit research consortia to determine how to consent on communicating with devices inside the vehicle. That took about 4.5 years. We developed about 3,500 pages of specifications, at which time they were all moved into the World Standards Organizations for ongoing maintenance. And products that came out of that were things like the SAE Common Message Set, the Bluetooth hands-free profile, the network architecture. All of those form the fundamental aspects of how the automakers consent on communication. At the completion of that time, we then formed a new group called the VII Consortium, wrote a $45 million cooperative agreement between the U.S. government for this new automaker consortia to develop how the devices would communicate external to the vehicle. And that's under a protocol called Dedicated Short-Range Communication. After about a year, they realized that the automakers primarily dealt with Tier 1s and Tier 2 companies, primary suppliers to their industry. So they'd asked that a nonprofit trade association be formed in order to help with all the parties to help build out all of the elements that had to happen for a full ecosystem. So besides just having tier suppliers, you also had infrastructure and computation and processing and communication companies. And so for the last 8 years, the Connected Vehicle Trade Association has operated as an international nonprofit business league that's formed to advance the interest of the industries and organizations involved in vehicle communications. And it's not just DSRC, it's all forms of vehicles to all forms of communications. And our board consists of 17 members who represent companies from 17 different industry groups, so that we have the ability to incorporate all of those views into the developments that go forward. Janice?
Thank you, Scott. I'd like to introduce Andrew Maliszewski. He is from Micronet. Micronet is a leading provider of ruggedized mobile data terminals for fleet applications. Andrew.
Hello, everybody. I'm the acting executive vice president of Micronet, one of the most successful companies in providing hardware platforms in the commercial space for the trucking industry. The company develops and manufactures and markets innovative computing systems for mission-critical applications. And it's a NASDAQ-listed company with about 190 employees, a leader in supplying, again, those heavy-duty trucks with about 100,000 units sold over the last 15 months in North America alone, and growing very quickly. I wanted to just to mention some of the future technologies that it's working on to enable the connected vehicle. It's working very actively with some of the top truck manufacturers and the current technology service provider for connected trucks to develop the kind of platform that we envision will be needed for the next generation connected vehicle application. We need more reliability, more versatility, manageability, and flexibility. And most notably, as the connected vehicle becomes more of a reality, at least in the commercial space, we see a plethora of different applications competing for usage on those vehicles, and managing that becomes a significant challenge. And Micronet is at the forefront of providing that stable platform to do that, of course, in collaboration with a very extensive ecosystem which is involved in this industry, and which Scott McCormick so well outlined.
Thank you, Andrew. Next and last, we have Scott Sedlik of Inrix, and Inrix is a premier provider of advanced traffic information and driver services. Scott.
Thank you. So Inrix is a global leader in traffic, the connected car, and commercial vehicle space. Today we have over 200 customers across the automotive, government, mobile, fleet, and media businesses consuming our traffic and other services. And we're delivering that by having the largest network of GPS-enabled vehicles and devices reporting their current location and information to us. So over 100 million smartphones, consumer vehicles, and commercial fleet vehicles are reporting into the Inrix Smart Driver Network. That allows us to provide traffic and other services across 35 countries, including most recently launching in China and Russia. So with that in mind, specific to the connected car, we see that just 11% of new cars are connected today. But ABI Research expects that over 60% of cars will be two-way connected by 2017 globally. And within Europe and the U.S., that penetration will actually be over 80%, which is a huge opportunity for the ecosystem. Ultimately, the type of connectivity into the car, whether it's WiMAX, GPRS, GSM, or 4G, ultimately really doesn't matter to the consumer. What they care about is being connected in the car and having enough bandwidth at a reasonable price for their infotainment and navigation needs. So how does this play across the connected car vision? Well, ultimately, the growth of smartphones and the integration of touchscreens, voice, and new user interfaces are really transforming how drivers interact with their cars. Touchscreens are quickly becoming increasingly standard and really is a game changer in terms of consumption of content and media in the car. Strategy Analytics is forecasting that 68% of the 119 million vehicles that will ship in 2019 will have center multifunction infotainment screens. That's 81 million vehicles shipping that year with large screen touch displays that can take advantage of this next generation of content. So how we see this playing across the connected car marketplace is through a combination of what you're seeing on the screen today. Through the integration of smartphones and the applications that consumers and commercial users are starting to adopt, and having that information fully integrated into the infotainment head units. Through the concept of daily navigation, intermodal routing, road weather, EV charging, fuel prices, and parking availability, we see this rolling out across the connected car spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That was very helpful. Okay, let's talk about what the connected vehicle is. I noticed that we got some questions how we define the connected vehicle, and by the way, I'd like to mention at this point that we do have registrants from 40 countries. We do have a very international group on the line, and that's pretty exciting. So, what is the connected vehicle? The advanced connected vehicle includes localized vehicle-to-vehicle communications, vehicle to infrastructure communication. And when we're talking about infrastructure, that might be traffic lights, it might be a work area on a highway, and then we have vehicle-to-device systems. Now, when we talk about devices, that could include a pneumatic device like a phone or a tablet or something else, aftermarket or embedded devices, or all three. Communications that we're talking about are cellular, Wi-Fi, DSRC, which is dedicated short-range communications, and WAVE, the wireless access and vehicle environment communications. And when we do, someone asked the question about why connected vehicle, not connected car, we're talking about both passenger and commercial fleet vehicles. So let's talk about how we might be able to use this. I'll give you a few examples of the connected vehicle, what it can enable. Safety is a big one. Vehicle-to-vehicle communication can prevent collisions at intersections. Vehicles can send automatic warnings to each other, including if the vehicle ahead has suddenly stopped and applied the brakes. Mobility applications help people get places easier and can seamlessly integrate with mobility and activities that occur outside of the vehicle. And consumer services, we're talking about being able to be directed to an empty parking space or a suitable restaurant, the type of stuff that we might be able to do on our cell phones today. And then commercial services, OEM monitoring, vehicle monitoring for vehicle performance, vehicle issues, and mobile resource management, efficiencies in managing people, operations, and fleets. So that's, in a very small nutshell, an overview of the connected vehicle, but our panel is going to be expanding on it. So, panel questions. Much of what we call the connected vehicle today is really focused on infotainment, the sorts of things that we might be able to do on a smartphone. What type of functionality will connected vehicle technology enable that will be commercially available in vehicles or in the aftermarket in about 6 years' time? Panel.
You know, this is David Jumpa speaking. I think that in the next 6 years, and actually starting this year through 2017 and 2018, you're going to see more of an integrated cloud service into the car, very similar to the way your smartphone works today. You're going to see a hybrid model, meaning that it's the combination of the embedded modules that have been added to vehicles for safety and security services, as well as the smartphones that you personally are bringing into the car with your entertainment content and your profiles and the things that you personally like to do that personalizes your services. That integration of bringing that into the vehicle to allow it to work safely within the car while you're driving or provide rear seat services is all going to be within reach here within the next 6 years. Some of that is already starting to deploy. There's been several announcements by auto manufacturers on the first generation of these type of services. I think in the next 3 to 4 years, you'll start seeing a hybrid model where the wireless carriers, the mobile network operators, get involved in providing a combination of the content of these services with the smartphone and use the head unit within your car as just another screen.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead.
This is Andrew Maliszewski, and again, I'm looking at this more from the commercial vehicle perspective. And in that space, of course, connected vehicle technologies are already very widely used because the return on investment of using those is very significant. I think that what we're seeing is that one size doesn't fit all, and just in the trucking space, we see that their vehicles are used in very different ways by different types of organizations. And
so where do you see it in 6 years' time?
In in 6 years' time, we're going to see vehicles that are able to support a plethora of different applications and evolving and changing applications in a very reliable fashion. So in the same way as we use our iPhone today in very different ways individually, the vehicle will be able to do the same thing. It will be able to adapt very quickly to the different software suites that a fleet may require.
Okay, well that's interesting. Anyone else?
This is Scott McCormick. I think we need to get away from the human-centric aspect for just a minute. Where, we tend to look at infotainment because it's interacting with the driver or passenger. But really what's going to be happening is you're going to be capturing from the vehicle data. It could be about road condition, weather condition, traffic. It could be about diagnostics on the vehicle. And in some aspects of that are going to be communicated off. Excuse me. Some aspects of it are going to be presented to the driver. Okay, and some of it's going to be processed on the vehicle or processed, as David mentioned, in the cloud to do two things. It may be to communicate information back to not just the occupants of the vehicle, but it may communicate it back to the vehicle itself so that it can adapt to the changing conditions that are out there. So once you've created the pipelines, and there's going to be multiple pipelines that are to and from the vehicle, that doesn't just open up the handphone or tablet context of looking at what you will be interacting with. It's an effort to improve the safety and the enjoyability of your travel.
Right, this is Scott Sedlik with one final comment. I think in 6 years' time we're really going to see a transformation of data. Really, it's big data, and it's not just the information that's being sent to a driver, but it's really that whole ecosystem of how that information is being shared to government agencies to let them manage congestion-based tolling, to adapt to put in place adaptive traffic management and other kinds of solutions based off of dynamic information. It's information that's sent to the drivers, both consumers and commercial vehicle drivers, but also like the fleet managers to better manage their overall fleet. And finally, we're going to be seeing the introduction over the next 2 to 3 years of semi-autonomous vehicles. Elon Musk with Tesla proclaimed last week that 90% of automated driving functionality will be live in Tesla vehicles in the next 3 years.
Interesting. Thank you. We are getting a lot of questions in on this, and I hope to bring it back to answer some of the questions that I'm receiving. I do want to hit on a few other topics, and then we can go back to this. So thank you for the people who are sending in very good questions. I would like to now poll the listeners. I'd like to know what you think. The connected vehicle industry has evolved, and it has grown significantly. In the future, what do you think could hold it back the most? Is it workable revenue models, regulatory issues, demand, technology issues, or none of the above? Please check off one of those and submit your answers, and we will talk about we'll talk about the results as we get them in. But in the meantime, panel, what do you think? Scott Sedlik?
Sure. I really see 3 areas that are holding back the broad adoption in the connected vehicle space. The first is availability of high-speed cellular data networks. Now that is changing. In the U.S., Verizon, for example, has introduced 4G across the entire country. It's available in more than 80% of the population. And globally, it will be pervasive by 2018. So we see that significantly changing, but it is taking some time. The second area is business models. Who pays for this data and the connectivity? Does the vehicle manufacturer pay? Does the consumer pay? Or some combination? And to be honest, we're working with automobile manufacturers every day, and they're struggling with how to present these services into the car, and whether to use the user's smartphone plan or an embedded modem or some combination, and how those services are bundled.
Let's now look at our poll results. We have almost 42% saying that they believe it's the workable revenue models, 32% regulatory. Very few people think it's a consumer demand issue, technology issue, 17%, and none of the above, 7.5%. Other panelists, what do you think? Are people right?
Well, this is Scott McCormick. What I'd like to say here is that in my view of the world, which has been the last 13 years in this space, I don't see it as being held back. I mean, what most people don't realize is that these systems have to be extremely robust before you put it in the car. If an app doesn't work on your phone, you throw it away, right?
And we're talking about what could hold it back. We're not saying that's held back, but what might hold it back.
Okay, but where I'm going with that is that in order for this to go forward, the revenue models, the consumer ultimately pays. Whether it's when they buy the car or when they get it serviced, the reality is that the automakers don't pay for something that they don't get compensated for, or do the suppliers or anyone else. So the terms of the revenue models are being discovered right now, but we have a very evolving environment that says, well, okay, what part of it can we bring into the car that's safe, okay, for the human-machine interface so that you're not being distracted by doing this, and what level of quality of service can I maintain across the country, whatever country that is or region, so that you want to purchase this car. And most importantly, I think the one thing that will hold it back is development of adequate security profiles, because once you create a gateway into this vehicle, there's a possibility for incursion.
Okay.
This is David Jumpa. You know, there are several things that could potentially hold it back. Just to build a little bit on what both Scotts have actually said. One is just a workable platform, meaning that several of the programs that have actually taken place in North America and Europe have been very disparate. So the auto manufacturers right now are mobilizing going forward to try to standardize on their specific IT platform on how they're going to integrate services into the vehicle. Those things will be, security, regulatory. There's a lot of drivers behind that. That is one of the key things that are holding it back. It's not necessarily technology. It's actually deployment of these services and having to deal with the multiple cultural effects, the localization that has to take place of these services by market, and then providing direction to their tier ones. You have to recognize that in this industry, everything has to get tested and tested and tested. It's quality, quality, quality. And it's an industry that is in the first time trying to adopt a consumer model of services that continues to change. Traditionally, you buy a vehicle, and that vehicle doesn't actually change until you buy another one, right? So whatever you buy is what you get. This is a different model that we're talking about now. Now there's an extension of that consumer, of that driver, to the auto manufacturer and to the market. That is a new model that is actually the auto manufacturers are trying to put processes, services, and develop a new ecosystem and supply chain that can actually help them through that. So from a business model perspective, I think you have several constituents that are actually joining this new ecosystem. You have the service providers like the wireless carriers. You have content providers that are coming in with marketing and service models. And there's different platforms and technology approaches to be able to do that. So it's going to be a very interesting 6 years to see how all this develops.
I noticed that I do have a comment here by an audience member who says, no one mentioned security, yet this might be actively attacked by hackers or misused by some governments to track citizens. Interesting comment. We're going to go on to our next question. And the next question I have for the panel is really about the ecosystem. So currently the ecosystem for connected vehicles, it includes car and truck makers, wireless carriers, content and app developers, integrators, data handlers, and platform providers. Is that how it's going to look in the future? What do you think? Scott McCormick, what do you think?
Well, it's difficult to predict how it's actually going to work out. I mean, we're seeing a lot of consolidation in this space. As you've seen, Nokia acquired, Navtech, and Verizon acquired Hughes. And so how actually this comes forward, those are really important things because, as David mentioned, to paraphrase it, the car makers and the tiers, they don't sell to consumers. They market to them. They sell to dealers. And now that you're incorporating content from third parties, they haven't any idea of how these revenue models work or how to do revenue sharing, and they're exploring that now with these new partners. And there's no one model that's obviously sitting out there as the obvious way to do it. So the question is going to be how it changes. And to get back just briefly, when you look at an insurance coming into this space or the telecoms coming into the space, these are people that know how to sell you a product for one day, for one time, for 1 week, for your family, for your enterprise, and do all the CRM. So those kinds of entities coming into this space are bringing a great deal of knowledge and expertise on how to do things that will really enable some substantial growth in this space. So I expect, as David said, these emerging business models to become quite creative over the next few years.
Thank you, Scott. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Scott Sedlik. So we're seeing massive change in the ecosystem, particularly in the consumer space. So automobile manufacturers who used to rely entirely on their what's called Tier 1 providers, the head unit platform providers such as Denso and Aishin and Pioneer and Alpine to provide the entire navigation and infotainment experience. That is transformed to now where companies like Inrix and others are now Tier 1s in terms of leveraging our technology experience and providing services directly to the OEMs, directly to the cars, in fact. That was unheard of 3 or 4 years ago, but it allows the auto manufacturers to move at lightning speeds. As a quick example, Audi selected Inrix for traffic services across Europe, and we were able to roll out that service from the selection of Inrix as a provider to actual deployment in cars in a 6-month time frame. Unheard of. That would have taken 3 to 4 years in the past. That's the kind of speed that's changing the ecosystem.
This is Andrew Maliszewski.
I'm going to move on to the next question just as a matter of time. My next question to the panel is really about the commercial vehicle market. And I have noticed from the attendees, there are a number of people on the call from the commercial vehicle market. And that market has been ahead of the car market in terms of intelligent uses. Connectivity is really being used to create logistics, mobility, mobile resource management efficiencies. Without getting into too much detail, what are the newest functions that connected technologies are currently enabling in fleets? And Andrew, why don't you kick us off on that?
Well, connected technologies are already used by most truckers and fleet operators. It enables them to operate smarter and they do have compelling return on investment in deploying these technologies. The connected computing technologies has increased by over 20% annually, and almost every large fleet uses these technologies, and the smaller ones are adopting them very quickly. The main applications are commercial grade navigation, dispatch and communications, electronic logbooks, driver safety applications, fuel tax applications, maintenance-related applications, and more the next generation, and already this is occurring, is integrating these applications that are cab or truck-centric with the back-end systems of the enterprises. And as we move more and more into the future, is the ability to add applications, evolve these applications quicker and faster. As it's been mentioned, the truck or the automotive industry moves pretty slowly, but it is facing this fast-moving technology technologies, so that the technologies that enable to make that happen quickly and reliably are certainly going to be at the forefront in at least in the commercial sector, and I presume in the consumer sector as well.
Thank you, Andrew.
This is David Jumpa. I think there's a lot of things that are happening in the commercial side of the business, not just from aftermarket-related products, as Andrew just pointed out, but several services that are actually being brought in for consumers via smartphones. The car manufacturers, the line fit programs, today, it is getting too expensive as connected vehicles get deeper and deeper into their product line. It is starting to become too expensive to remove the embedded devices or remove the applications and differentiate between fleet vehicles they sell and consumer line vehicles they sell. So within the commercial side of the business, there are several avenues that are starting to open up, or several product lines that are opening up for connectivity with line fit programs. Ford has announced a program with their crew chief. Several other OEMs are in the process of implementing for announcements of fleet-related programs that address any specific vertical where they sell their vehicles. And these aren't just trucks. These are also just sedans or for passenger vehicles that are actually being leased by salespeople for pharmaceutical or whatever the industry may be. Being driven by the insurance factor, by consumer behavioral changes, as well as other financial reporting tools that they may add that they may get directly from the data in the vehicle and not have to get from the driver themselves. So there's a big market there that actually has an immediate return on investment, at least that is traditionally has been seen already in the aftermarket.
Great, that's interesting. So we're going to do another poll. I have another question that I would like to ask the audience. Vehicle activities such as where and when a person drives is going to generate massive data. This has been an issue in the industry. People are talking a lot about who owns the data. So let's assume that the vehicle OEMs will own the sensor data, the stuff for maintenance, service needs. But who is going to own the personal data generated? Vehicle OEMs, data infrastructure providers, such as Cisco, or content and service providers? So who for the most part, is going to own the personal data? So please vote. Okay, go ahead, and we will start talking about it.
Yeah, let me chime in on something here. The United States is not like the EU. We don't have a legislated personal data privacy law. What we have was a law written in 1995 by the FTC, and it describes how you would create a policy or how you would create a law, but they didn't actually create one. There are 24 specific regulations that deal with personal data privacy, and those are all very specific to industry. There's one for HIPAA, for medical records. There's one for financial transactions. All 24 of them are non-mandatory. They all recommend industry oversight. Okay, and so the issue is that when you start talking about the car, and the reason we don't have one is because of the laissez-faire form of economics that this country runs on. We will never have, in all likelihood, a personal data privacy law that says who owns what data. So what's going to happen is it's going to devolve into a lot of different varieties of ownership, particularly the communicated data, because the communicated data now has two levels of ownership. So when you start looking at this, the question is there an appropriate guideline out there that the world is comfortable with? When we look at it, when you look at your cell phone, you give up an awful lot of privacy and data because you have a high value proposition for that for the uses that you get out of that device. So the question is one of the questions we should be asking are they getting any more information than they're already getting out of the phone, right? And secondly, is it really the data, or is it the knowledge you can derive from that data?
Okay, so we have our results in, and so just over half think it will be the content and service providers, followed by the vehicle OEMs, followed by the wireless carriers, and just a few think it will be the data infrastructure providers. Interesting. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, this is Scott Sedlik. As a content and service provider, this is actually a very interesting question. because what we see is that the companies like the vehicle OEMs, they actually own the data that's coming off the vehicle and driven by the consumers today. And what companies like Inrix does is anonymize that data and create a network effect so that we're getting information today, for example, from Ford, Toyota, BMW, Audi. We're aggregating all that information together, creating more of a network effect. But again, it's anonymous data. One thing that the auto manufacturers are concerned about is really companies like Google and letting Google provide search in a car is like a Trojan horse into the automotive world, that the OEMs are concerned that providing a service like local search, Google will start to get access to that data and take more and more ownership of the customer experience away from the OEMs.
Interesting. So one of the questions that I'm getting from audience members that I was about to ask anyway is, how are the revenue models going to work? Who's going to be making the most money in terms of what types of company off the connected vehicle? It seems like we really haven't figured out workable revenue models in all cases. So any thoughts about that?
This is David. I think this is actually a good extension to who's going to own the data. I think that the data that's in the vehicle, there's a service that is going to be provided to the consumer or the fleet driver, and the applications that they may be using collects a certain amount of data to feed it, but there's other data while you're using that application, just like when you're using any of your smartphone apps today. Some of those applications do not require your GPS location, do not require any logs, but you actually are given that right away when you select OK, right, when you download it. The same is going to start happening in the vehicle, and it's been happening, to be honest. So to Scott's point, the data is anonymous at this point, but as these business models start changing to bring other content providers or other traditional marketing business models into the vehicle, it cannot stay anonymous. You're going to have to start getting personalized information, and that's when you're going to start going into wireless carriers getting involved and providing other services as part of what they do today, but also bringing other models with different content providers to be able to monetize that. And one other thing to point out, it's a very large business, but when you look at the business, it's actually broken apart a very large ecosystem, everything that goes from hardware providers, module suppliers, to service providers like the service delivery platform that Airbiquity provides, Choreo. We're one component of a very large ecosystem, and the ownership of that is still going to continue to change year over year depending on how much of this is going to be needed, and then also what applications are going to be enabled within the car.
Thank you. I am now going to ask the panel some questions that have come up through the audience. So this will be our Q&A period. And the first question I would like to ask is actually from Venezuela. And the question is, how is the influence of the car connected to the LBS industry? And for those of you who don't know, LBS is a location-based services industry.
Well, that's very interesting question, because LBS originally was an aftermarket device. It was your personal navigation devices. It got had wide opportunity for an attraction to a segment of the buying public, and so a number of lines incorporated it into there. And it was primarily providing initially routing and navigation, right? Since that time, they've looked at saying, well, okay, what other additional service can I have? Should I give you fuel prices? Should I give you locations of points of interest? Should I do all these other things? And so the location-based services industry has now evolved past that to say, well, we need to look at all of the infrastructure. Where are speed zones changing? Where are there lights that maybe I can coordinate the timing once we have signal phase and timing capability? Where are all of those aspects coming? The interesting part is that it's getting competition primarily from your handsets. Smartphones are able to bring down, as people aren't spending several $1,000s to put a navigation system in their car because they get it for free on their phone. And that now leverages a whole bunch of different services and capabilities. So one of the things that is a struggle in the automotive industry, it says, are we too late to be part of that game? Because your phone is getting very good at knowing exactly where you are without, and not only that, because it has a very good three-dimensional accelerometer in it, it can tell whether you're hard braking or hard cornering or going 12 miles an hour on an expressway.
This is Andrew Maliszewski. That is a very interesting question and great response there. I would like to add from the commercial vehicle perspective that, again, one size doesn't fit all, and certainly there are many fleets where having a embedded device that is whose performance is controlled in a very systematic fashion and a very reliable fashion is very important. Micronet is a major supplier of those types of embedded systems, and it has introduced lines of more like bring your own device flexible systems, but certainly the major bulk of demand is still very much your embedded system in the commercial world, and depending on what kind of fleet, some of the more flexible bring your own or removable devices are becoming popular, but certainly at a very slow pace.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, I have another question. This time it's from Washington State, and that is, who will pay for connectivity?
This is David. Connectivity is going to be paid by multiple providers. We're seeing today that there are several programs where the auto manufacturer themselves are paying for the connectivity, but they're collecting some data. Like if you look at, if they're collecting some data as part of their applications that they're also reselling to other service providers. So to date, if you look at safety and security with OnStar, the consumer pays for part of that connectivity. If you actually look at some of the smartphone integration programs, it's starting to be embedded into the vehicle as part of an overall head unit, just the same way you'll have an AM and FM radio or a feature set or a SKU, for say, that you may have. That connectivity is being provided by the auto manufacturer as part of the product, but there's now other bundles of services that you as the consumer can sign up for. There are other services that are cost-effective services like potential insurance programs or affinity programs that may be added to that. So these business models are evolving. I think and this is where the complication comes on who's going to pay for this connectivity, because traditionally the auto manufacturer doesn't have a way to collect service revenue from the market, right? They sell a vehicle to a dealership, and that distribution is through the dealership. There is no attachment to the consumer, and this is where I think the market is going to, as it continues to evolve and grow, you're going to find different avenues or different sources for who wants to pay or who is paying for that as well as part of the overall experience.
Thank you. So I have some more questions here. I have someone here from Canada who is concerned about how the distracted driving laws are going to play out. And let's more focus on what is going to be done, what's going to be off limits for the connected car in terms of distracted driving. Not by law, but just like what the industry. Where do we draw that line? Scott, do you want to answer that? Scott McCormick?
Let me lay the foundation for that so everybody understands. The general human-machine interface that the car, the user interface that exists within a car, the automakers fundamentally require that you be able to locate a control or a piece of information and actuate it or recognize it and return your attention to driving within 2 seconds. Okay, so that's the exact opposite pair, because at highway speeds, you can travel a tremendous distance with your eyes off the road. Now, so the issue was when handsets first became available in the car, they did a number of studies and they continue to do them, and it's like, well, okay, if I'm using my phone, my reaction time can be as much as 30% slower than if I'm not using the phone, and even if I'm using a headset just to talk on the phone, it's still 10% slower, because that's the same amount of reaction time slowdown that you have if you're talking to somebody sitting next to you. So when you look at the human-machine interface, when you look at all those apps and services, your phone and your tablet is the exact opposite user interface paradigm that you need to have in a car. Those devices are built for you to focus your attention on. So the issue with distraction is actually threefold. One, it's the technical aspect. There are systems that you can put on phones that if you're going faster than 15 miles an hour, it shuts off texting and manual input and everything else. Guess what? Almost 100% of the people that put those on their phones put it on their kids' phones, not their own. Okay. Secondly, the thing to think about is there has to be some level of understanding of what the impact of having this device is, and have an effective legal system that supports it. In almost every state in the United States, the fine for littering is $200. The fine for using your cell phone in those states that have legislated it is $50. And I guarantee you, you're very unlikely to kill somebody littering, but you will be if you're texting and crash into their car. So the crime sort of has to fit the severity of the activity that goes on. At the third level is what? Okay, sorry.
No. Okay, just finish your thought.
And at the third level, you have to have a fundamental, at a policy level, someone has to figure out, well, what is the federal policy going to be that says here's what we can and cannot do, like was done in Europe. The problem is that that's about as unlikely to get as the one for privacy.
Interesting.
This is David. I'd like to actually echo just what Scott said, and I think and we as Airbiquity have aligned ourselves knowing that is coming. The limit itself, it's a tough one to address, Janice, because they're the same 10 apps that you're going to want to use in your car. I mean, there may be 2 or 3 that would be the same as the one on my smartphone. Right, so from a car manufacturer's perspective, to provide a service to their drivers is not what are the 10 or 50 apps. There may have to be 200 or 300 apps out there that are enabled within the vehicle, but there may only be 10 or 8 that may be allowed within the vehicle. And one of the things that Airbiquity has done on a global scale that we have deployed is we have developed the architecture to allow for these policy changes by country, by city even, or region. So we enable the services that are being brought in from a smartphone as they come up to be used, whether it be through speech recognition or natural language services and text-to-speech. We have the ability to, through the cloud, to consistently change those policies of what can and can't be used, as well as the HMI designs that how the consumer is interacting with these apps. Because we do see that the policies are going to continue to change year over year. And like I said, if you take it from a car manufacturer, that is a lot to deal with. So that is, while it's actually they're focusing on how do we actually enable the car services, at the same time they're being cautious because they don't know what they don't know. So these are architectural discussions that are being taken place today for model year 16 and 17, and to determine how do you actually manage this once it's out there.
So I have a question that has come in from a user wanting to know who the big name companies are that are involved with connected vehicles. So who are some of the companies? But we'll just assume that we don't need to bother saying the automakers because we know that they're all involved. So who are the other players?
I would offer we already showed that slide because they're all members of my board.
Okay. Could you just name a couple of those companies?
Well, I'm being serious. You have to look at there's a difference when there's a difference between whether or not you're involved in a space or whether you're providing leadership. Airbiquity, they're a member of the Connected Vehicle Trust Association. The founding members were companies like Delphi and Motorola and Cisco and Intel and Sprint, and so those companies are all still involved and have been for almost 9 years now, and they've been involved at a level that's helped grow this space. When there are bigger companies out there that are not involved, but the question is are they advancing their personal business model or are they advancing the entire ecosystem? And it's the ecosystem that matters.
Okay. All right.
I would agree. I think if you from the ecosystem slide that I had as part of my presentation, if you look at all those names that I had on there, all those companies are actually getting involved. A list of insurance companies, not just in North America, but in Europe and in Asia, list of system integrators are actually getting involved, but it's actually they're getting involved because the business is getting to be really big, right? So companies like Accenture, companies like IBM are getting involved in a big way. But at the same time, there's a little bit of caution as these big suppliers come in from the auto manufacturer, because what they're trying to avoid is they're trying to avoid the AM and FM scenario, meaning that everyone's going to have AM and FM if you don't get technology companies like Airbiquity, like Inrix, involved in providing different services that they can continue to innovate from.
Okay, thank you. So let's see, I will pick another question here. This one is, how will the market consolidate? Do you expect more mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, this is Scott.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, we definitely see significant industry consolidation happening now and even advancing significantly going forward. You know, we're starting to see that, for example, with Nokia Devices and Services being acquired by Microsoft, announced last week. So there's fewer and the problems that RIM is having, for example, and BlackBerry, and how that will change over the next 12 months in the smartphone space. We're seeing consolidation in the commercial vehicle provider space. There are hundreds of providers that are offering the same services, but in specific regions or in specific verticals and sub-verticals. We're seeing a lot of acquisitions and integrations across many small, mid-sized companies to create larger companies focused across providing those services across multiple verticals.
Okay.
This is Andrew Maliszewski. In the commercial space, there are probably about 3,000 companies worldwide providing commercial connected vehicle type of services. But certainly the top 10 companies, account for probably a good 20-25%. And consolidation is occurring very, very quickly as we speak. I think we will see in not too long distant future a more traditional view of an industry where the top 5 to 10 are going to be controlling certainly over 60%. So that's a harbinger of what will happen to consumer connected vehicle. I don't know, but maybe it is.
Okay, so I have a question here about personalization, that the connected vehicle will allow vehicle OEMs to personalize vehicles more, and will that slow down the vehicle OEMs in delivering product personalized?
This is David Jumpa. That's an area that Airbiquity has really focused on tremendously over the last 5 to 6 years. As I mentioned earlier in my slide, one of the areas that we have enabled for these services is provided the OEMs APIs and different templates that could be loaded onto their head units and their vehicles, because traditionally all these services that the OEMs provide are either on or off, meaning that they either have FortSync or they don't have FortSync. They either have OnStar or they don't have OnStar. As these vehicles are now changing and more of the technology and these head units are coming down to the mid-tier and lower-tier vehicles, they're starting now to try to differentiate the services that they're offering by vehicle model, and even within the model by SKU. And we have developed a cloud-based platform that allows them to do that, not only to differentiate by vehicle model, but also to differentiate by services as well as by region, to bring the cultural effect into that. So personalization is a big thing. And personalization not only from having just one driver for the car, but personalization from having 2 or 3 drivers for the car. I think someone mentioned earlier that the safety features that are being added for slowdown or not being able to text in the vehicle are usually the parents buying it for their kids. Well, that is actually going to be enabled in the next couple of years, where you can enable that from your web portal, from your smartphone app, if your son is driving the vehicle, to turn off some of the features that will have similar like a kill switch on their smartphone and how it actually interfaces to the car. So that level of personalization, the level of personalization when you actually, if it's you or your husband bringing in your phone into the car, what are the 5 or 10 apps that you want actually to be able to use within the car versus your husband wanting to be used to the car. So all those services and that level of personalization has been in the works. Some of that is actually getting deployed this year with a couple of our OEM customers. And I think it's going only to get better and better as the transition and the way the OEMs are thinking now that they have a platform that they can actually provide this flexibility to their customer base.
Great. I'm going to ask one last question here. And that question is going to be, will the market end up fragmented into many small providers, or will it be monopolized by a small number of large providers? Which is better for the industry and for the user?
I'll take a stab at that briefly. Right now, and I'll use an analogy. Right now there's 73 app stores worldwide. And we expect that number to grow a bit before we start seeing consolidation. And the reason you're going to see consolidation is because these app stores just provide a service that you have to duplicate if you're an app provider across multiple ones to get the coverage you want, because they're approaching niche markets. There are some things that are useful for niche markets, but those tend to be very regional or very centric to particular likes and dislikes. For example, people that want off-road vehicles versus people that drive motorcycles, right? So when you get down to it, though, we expect to see a lot of startups coming up and a lot of companies getting into this space, but history tells us that consolidation will occur. We're looking at possibly there only being 15 tier 1s in about 5 years left with the consolidation. And now that you're seeing consolidation between telecoms and other entities like insurers, et cetera, we're seeing them looking forward and saying, well, what is my new business model going forward? Think about that. If you're an insurer, and if you get to a point where cars can't run into other cars and run off the road, that fundamentally changes your business model. So you have to be looking out forward and saying, what is it that we will evolve into, and who do we need as our new channel partners, or who do we need to absorb or incorporate in order to continue that relevancy and profitability?
Anyone else?
This is Scott Sedlik. I think we'll continue to see consolidation in certain parts of the ecosystem. Fundamentally, let's face it, there's really 2 app stores that matter, Android and Apple. In the smartphone space, there's just not enough market share in any of the other ones that make sense. In the service provider space, I think we're going to continue to see hundreds of companies that are bringing new innovations to market. And some of them will evolve as private companies and going public, and others will be gobbled up by larger players who want to add that functionality into their networks. But I fundamentally think we're not blocking the smaller technology companies like Inrix and Airbiquity from these larger, multi-thousand, tens of thousands of employee companies that are getting into this space in some way.
Okay, well, I would like to I'd like to thank David Jumpa, Scott McCormick, Andrew Maliszewski, and Scott Sedlik, and I'd like to also thank our audience and GPS World and Bethany Chambers. Thank you very much for listening today.
All right. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and thank you to our platinum sponsor, Hemisphere. An on-demand recording of this event will be emailed to you 2 weeks from today. Please join us for our next event, What's the Latest and Greatest GNSS Products for 2014 and Beyond, which is scheduled for Thursday, October 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can register online today at gpsworld.com/webinars. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you there.